Some souls are not rescued by miracles. Sometimes, they are rescued by something the world already gave up on. The rain had been falling over northern Idaho since before dawn, cold and steady against the cracked pavement of the County K-9 retirement yard. Water dripped from rusted chain-link fences and pooled beneath rows of aging concrete kennels that smelled faintly of bleach, wet fur, and old memories no one wanted anymore. Most people never came here unless they had to. Retired police dogs were expensive to care for, difficult to place, and too damaged for ordinary homes. Some had bad hips. Some startled at loud sounds. Some simply stared too long into corners like they were still watching doors in dark alleys somewhere far away. By 10 in the morning, only one visitor had shown up. Caleb Hayes stepped out of his faded Ford pickup wearing an old olive-green jacket and work boots stained with sawdust. 38 years old. Tall. Broad-shouldered. White male. The kind of man who carried silence like extra weight across his back. A thin scar cut along his jawline beneath several days of unshaved stubble, and his pale blue eyes looked tired in the way only lonely men understood. The clerk inside the shelter barely glanced up from her coffee when he walked in. "You here for the shepherd?" she asked quietly. Caleb nodded once. "Just looking." She gave a small shrug. Most people say that. Outside, thunder rolled low across the mountains. The woman led him through the narrow corridor of kennels while dogs barked behind steel gates. Some excited, some anxious, some simply desperate not to be forgotten. But near the very end of the row, one kennel remained completely silent. The German shepherd inside didn't move when they approached. He lay on the concrete beneath a flickering yellow light. Massive paws crossed beneath his chest, dark sable fur threaded heavily with gray around the muzzle and ears. Old scars marked the bridge of his nose. One ear carried a torn edge that never healed correctly. A weathered tag hung above the kennel door. Titan. Retired K-9. Handler deceased. Adoption, $10. He's 7, the clerk said softly. Used to work narcotics and tactical response. Caleb crouched slightly, hands resting on his knees. Titan finally lifted his head. Amber eyes met pale blue ones through the rain-streaked fencing. Calm. Watchful. Not aggressive. Just tired. "Why $10? Caleb asked. The woman hesitated before answering. "Because nobody wants him." The words lingered in the cold air between them. Somewhere farther down the corridor, another dog barked sharply, but Titan never broke eye contact with Caleb. "He stopped responding after his handler died last winter," she continued. "Doesn't play. Doesn't trust strangers. Barely eats some days. We almost transferred him out last month." Caleb swallowed quietly. Something inside his chest tightened in a way he didn't expect. Titan slowly stood, joints stiff with age and years of service, then stepped closer to the fence without making a sound. Rainwater dripped steadily from the shelter roof. Caleb could smell damp cedar from the surrounding woods beyond the yard. For a long moment, neither man nor dog moved at all. Then Titan pressed the side of his scarred face gently against the cold chain-link fence between them. Not begging, not afraid, just exhausted from being left behind. Caleb stared at him, breathing slowly as something old and buried shifted painfully inside his chest. Because for the first time in years, he recognized the look in another living thing. It was the look of someone trying very hard not to hope anymore. The drive back to Caleb Hayes' cabin took nearly 2 hours through winding mountain roads lined with dark pine and melting snowbanks stained gray from old storms. Titan sat silently in the back seat of the pickup the entire way home, steady and alert beneath an old wool blanket the shelter clerk had handed over before they left. He never barked once, never whined. Every few miles, Caleb glanced into the rearview mirror, expecting to see fear or restlessness in the old German shepherd's eyes, but Titan only watched the passing forest through the rain-speckled glass like he was searching for something he had lost a long time ago. The farther they drove from town, the quieter the world became. No sirens, no voices, just the low hum of tires against wet pavement and the distant groan of wind moving through the mountains. Caleb had lived alone near Pine Hollow for almost 4 years now in a weathered cedar cabin tucked beside a frozen lake nobody visited anymore after winter. The place had once belonged to his father, back when laughter still lived inside its walls. Now the porch sagged slightly beneath heavy snow, and the windows glowed dim amber against the dark woods surrounding it. When Caleb parked beside the cabin, Titan hesitated before stepping out of the truck. Cold air drifted through the trees carrying the scent of pine sap, chimney smoke, and approaching snow. Titan stood motionless near the porch steps, large paws sinking softly into slush, while his amber eyes scanned every corner of the property with quiet precision. Old instincts. Old habits. Caleb grabbed a duffel bag from the truck bed and glanced back toward him. "You coming?" he asked softly. Titan did not move at first. Then slowly, carefully, he followed. Inside, the cabin felt colder than it should have. A cast iron stove ticked faintly in the corner, struggling against the Idaho winter pressing against the walls. The air carried traces of black coffee, old cedar wood, and loneliness settled too deeply into furniture left untouched for years. Caleb switched on a small lamp near the couch, casting warm golden light across faded hardwood floors. Titan stopped near the center of the room, ears slightly raised, posture tense but controlled. Caleb could almost feel the dog studying everything. Entry points. Shadows. Sounds beyond the walls. "Not much to look at," Caleb muttered. He pulled off his jacket and tossed it across a chair before filling a metal bowl with water near the stove. Titan approached slowly, drank once, then stepped back again without eating the food Caleb placed beside it. The old shepherd eventually settled near the front door instead, body curled tightly against the cold wood as if guarding it out of habit. Caleb noticed the way Titan never fully relaxed. Even resting, one ear remained alert, one eye half open, like some part of him still expected danger to come crashing through the dark at any second. Hours passed quietly. Snow began falling again outside, soft flakes drifting across the windows beneath pale moonlight. Caleb sat alone at the kitchen table with untouched whiskey beside him, staring at old bills and overdue notices spread beneath the yellow lamp glow. Across the room, Titan lifted his head slightly each time the wind pushed against the cabin walls. Neither of them slept. Sometime after midnight, a helicopter passed somewhere far beyond the mountains. The sound was faint, distant. Most people would not have noticed it at all. But Titan reacted instantly. His body stiffened hard against the floor. Ears flattened, breathing shallow. The old shepherd rose to his feet and backed slowly toward the corner near the fireplace, trembling almost invisibly beneath his thick sable coat. Caleb froze, because he knew that look. He had seen it before, not in dogs, in soldiers. The sound faded after a few seconds, swallowed again by the mountains and the falling snow. But Titan remained frozen near the fireplace long after the helicopter disappeared into the night. His breathing stayed uneven. His amber eyes darted toward the windows, then toward the front door, then back into shadows only he seemed able to see. Caleb leaned back slowly in his chair, watching the old shepherd with quiet understanding settling heavily into his chest. There had been nights overseas when men reacted the same way. One distant sound, one smell, one memory dragged violently back into the present. Caleb knew better than to move too fast. "Easy boy," he said softly. Titan did not respond. The dog lowered himself carefully onto the hardwood floor again, but kept his head raised, ears alert beneath the dim amber light of the cabin. Caleb stared into his untouched whiskey glass for a long moment before finally sliding it away from himself across the table. Outside, snow drifted steadily through the dark pine trees surrounding the lake. The world felt very far away out here, quiet enough for memories to grow loud. Caleb eventually stood and walked toward the hallway closet near the kitchen. The old wooden door groaned softly when he opened it. Inside sat things he had not touched in years. A folded military jacket, dust-covered boots, a weathered duffel bag still carrying the scent of sand and old smoke trapped deep within the fabric. Titan lifted his head immediately. The change was instant. His posture sharpened. Caleb noticed the dog staring directly at the closet with intense focus, nose twitching faintly, as though he recognized something hidden there. "What is it?" Caleb asked quietly. Titan rose slowly and approached the hallway without hesitation now, paused silent against the floorboards. He stopped beside the open closet and stared upward toward the highest shelf. Caleb frowned slightly before reaching up and pulling down an old cardboard storage box sealed with brittle tape. Dust scattered softly into the warm cabin air. Inside were photographs, service medals, old letters tied with faded string. and beneath them all rested a framed picture Caleb had not looked at since the funeral nearly 6 years ago. 3 soldiers stood together beneath harsh desert sunlight somewhere overseas, arms slung across each other's shoulders beside an armored vehicle covered in dust. Younger faces, tired smiles, men who still believed they would all make it home. Caleb's fingers tightened around the frame. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder somehow. Titan stepped closer beside him, staring quietly at the photograph before lifting his eyes toward Caleb's face. Then something strange happened. The old German shepherd gently pressed his nose against the lower corner of the frame and held it there without moving. Caleb swallowed hard. "Yeah," he whispered faintly. "I miss them too." His voice cracked slightly on the final word. He had spent years trying not to think about those days. About the convoy. About the explosion. About the silence afterward that never truly left him. Most nights, he buried the memories beneath work, isolation, and cheap whiskey. But standing there beside a retired police dog with scars of his own, the weight of it all suddenly felt impossible to outrun. Titan slowly lowered himself beside Caleb's feet near the closet door, calm now, watchful, but no longer trembling. The storm outside deepened. Wind brushed softly against the cabin walls like distant whispers through pine branches. Caleb slid down against the hallway wall until he sat on the floor beside the dog, exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. For several long minutes, neither of them moved at all. Then, quietly, almost carefully, Titan rested the heavy weight of his head against Caleb's knee. And for the first time in years, the cabin no longer felt completely empty. Morning arrived quietly over Pine Hollow beneath a sky the color of cold steel. Snow covered the frozen lakeshore in smooth, untouched blankets that shimmered faintly beneath the pale sunrise. Smoke curled lazily from the cabin chimney while deep inside the woods, pine branches creaked softly under fresh ice. Caleb woke before dawn out of habit more than rest. The couch beneath him smelled faintly of old wool and cedar smoke, and his neck ached from sleeping half upright beside the dying fire. For a few seconds, he forgot the dog was there. Then he heard it. Slow footsteps crossing the cabin floor. Careful, measured. Caleb opened his eyes to find Titan standing near the front window, staring into the snowy darkness beyond the glass. The German shepherd's silhouette looked almost wolf-like against the dim blue morning light, broad shoulders still powerful despite age, and old injuries hidden beneath his thick sable coat. Caleb pushed himself upright slowly. "You always patrol this early?" he muttered hoarsely. Titan flicked one ear backward at the sound of his voice, but never stopped watching outside. Somewhere far across the frozen lake, a truck engine rumbled faintly before disappearing again. Only then did Titan finally step away from the window. Caleb noticed something different that morning. The dog still carried caution in every movement, but there was less fear in him now, less distance. Titan no longer avoided the center of the room, no longer kept himself pressed tightly against walls or exits. It was small, barely noticeable, but healing often started quietly. Caleb lit the stove again while coffee brewed slowly in the kitchen. The rich, bitter smell filled the cabin, mixing with crackling firewood and cold mountain air drifting faintly through the old windows. Titan settled near the stove this time instead of the front door. Progress. Caleb poured coffee into a chipped ceramic mug and glanced toward the old shepherd. "You hungry yet?" Titan watched him carefully. After a moment, the dog finally crossed the room toward the untouched food bowl from the night before. Caleb stayed perfectly still as Titan lowered his head and ate slowly for the first time since arriving. Something about that simple sound, kibble against metal, hit Caleb harder than expected. Relief settled quietly into his chest, like watching someone decide not to give up after all. Later that afternoon, the snow finally stopped. Pale sunlight broke through the clouds in soft golden streaks across the frozen trees surrounding the property. Caleb pulled on his heavy jacket and grabbed an old axe from beside the porch. Titan followed him outside immediately. The cold air smelled sharp with pine resin and fresh snowmelt. Caleb spent the next hour splitting firewood beside the cabin while Titan wandered the property in slow, careful circles, nose low to the ground. Always alert, always scanning. But every few minutes the old shepherd looked back toward Caleb as if checking whether he was still there. At one point Titan stopped suddenly near the edge of the tree line. His ears rose sharply. His body stiffened beneath the afternoon light. Caleb turned instinctively, pulse tightening from old reflexes. But there was nothing there except wind moving softly through snow-covered pines. Titan remained still another moment before slowly relaxing again. Caleb lowered the axe. "You see ghosts too, huh?" he said quietly. Titan glanced toward him, and for the first time since arriving at the cabin, the old police dog's tail moved once. Just once. Small, careful, but real. Caleb stared at it in surprise before letting out a quiet laugh under his breath, rough and rusty from disuse. The sound drifted softly into the winter air. Titan walked closer after that and settled beside the woodpile while Caleb worked. Neither of them spoke, of course. They did not need to, because somewhere between the silence, the snow, and the steady rhythm of splitting wood, two wounded souls had begun learning the shape of trust again. 3 days passed beneath slow drifting snow and quiet mountain skies, and little by little the cabin began to feel alive again. Not louder, not happier exactly, just less hollow. Caleb noticed it in small things first. The way Titan no longer hesitated before entering a room. The way the old shepherd rested closer to the fireplace each night, instead of sleeping beside the door like he expected to leave at any moment. Even the silence inside the cabin had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt shared. On the 4th morning, sunlight finally broke through the storm clouds completely, pouring pale gold across the frozen lake outside the windows. Caleb stood at the kitchen counter making eggs and burnt toast, while an old country station crackled softly through the radio near the sink. Titan lay stretched near the stove, eyes half closed beneath the warmth. For the first time since bringing him home, the dog actually looked old instead of merely guarded. Caleb carried his coffee mug toward the front porch and stopped halfway when he noticed Titan suddenly lift his head. The dog's ears sharpened instantly toward the radio. Caleb froze too. The announcer's voice faded, replaced by the distant chopping rhythm of a medical helicopter somewhere beyond the mountains. It was faint, far away, but Titan reacted hard. He rose too quickly, claws scraping against hardwood as panic flashed across his face. The old shepherd backed into the corner beside the kitchen table, breathing shallow and fast. Caleb immediately shut off the radio, but the sound outside lingered several more seconds before finally disappearing into the cold morning sky. Titan remained trembling long after the noise faded. Caleb crouched carefully several feet away, keeping his voice calm and low. "Hey, easy now. You are all right." Titan did not look at him right away. His amber eyes stayed fixed toward the window, body rigid beneath his sable fur. Caleb understood that look too well. Some sounds never left you completely. Some memories hid deep until one wrong moment pulled them screaming back into daylight. Caleb sat down slowly against the kitchen cabinets without pushing closer. "I used to hate helicopters too," he admitted quietly. Titan's ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice. Caleb stared down into his untouched coffee mug. Steam drifted softly upward into the cold cabin air. "First few years after Afghanistan, every time I heard rotor blades," he stopped speaking for a moment, jaw tightening. "Felt like my chest forgot how to breathe." Titan slowly turned his head toward him then. Caleb gave a faint, humorless smile. "Guess we are both a little broken, huh?" The old shepherd stared at him for several long seconds before finally stepping away from the corner. Slowly, carefully, Caleb remained completely still as Titan crossed the room and lowered himself beside him on the floor. Warm fur pressed lightly against Caleb's arm. No fear, no hesitation, just quiet understanding. Outside, wind moved softly through the pine trees surrounding the cabin, carrying the clean scent of snow and cedar through tiny cracks in the windows. Caleb rested one hand gently against Titan's thick neck for the first time since bringing him home. The dog did not pull away. Instead, Titan let out a long, exhausted breath and settled his heavy head across Caleb's boot. Something inside Caleb shifted then. Small, fragile, but real. Because for years he had carried the weight of surviving alone. And somehow this old retired police dog seemed to understand that loneliness without a single word being spoken. By evening, snow began melting slowly from the roof outside. Water dripped steadily from the gutters while orange firelight flickered warmly across the cabin walls. Caleb sat near the stove reading through overdue bills he still could not afford to pay. Titan slept beside the chair now instead of near the exits. At one point the old shepherd stirred briefly in his sleep, paws twitching faintly, as though running through some distant memory. Caleb reached down instinctively and rested his hand against the dog's shoulder. "You are home now," he whispered softly into the quiet room. And this time, Titan slept peacefully through the night. By the second week, winter loosened its grip slightly over Pine Hollow. Thin streams of snowmelt trickled beneath the frozen lake ice, and patches of dark earth began appearing beneath the trees surrounding the cabin. The mornings still carried a sharp bite, but the air smelled different now. Cleaner somehow. Softer. Caleb noticed the change in Titan too. The old German shepherd had begun following him everywhere without being asked. Out to the woodshed, down to the mailbox near the road, even beside the old fishing dock half buried beneath ice along the lake. Always close, always watchful. Yet there was peace in the dog now where tension once lived. One cloudy afternoon, Caleb drove into town for supplies while Titan sat calmly in the passenger seat beside him. The old pickup rattled along the mountain roads beneath low gray skies, while classic country music hummed quietly through the speakers. Titan rested his muzzle near the window, watching pine forests blur past beneath drifting fog. It was the first time Caleb had seen him truly relaxed outside the cabin. Pine Hollow itself was barely more than a gas station, a diner, and a handful of weather-beaten buildings tucked between endless woods and frozen hills. Most people knew each other there, which meant everyone noticed the old police dog immediately when Caleb stepped out of the truck. "That your shepherd?" asked the cashier inside the general store. Caleb nodded once while stacking canned soup and coffee onto the counter. "Retired K9, he said quietly. The woman behind the register glanced toward Titan, waiting patiently near the door. "Beautiful dog," she murmured. "Looks like he has seen a lot." Caleb looked over at the old shepherd too. Titan sat perfectly still despite strangers moving around him, amber eyes calm but observant beneath the fluorescent lights. "Yeah," Caleb replied softly. "I think he has." On the drive home, snow began falling again in slow drifting flakes. Visibility dropped quickly along the narrow mountain road winding around the lake. Caleb tightened both hands on the steering wheel as wind rattled against the truck doors. Then suddenly Titan lifted his head sharply. His ears rose. His body stiffened beside the passenger seat. Caleb frowned. "What is it?" Titan stared hard through the windshield toward the road ahead. A second later, Caleb saw it too. An old SUV sat partially sideways near the ditch around the next bend, hazard lights blinking faintly through the snowfall. Caleb slowed immediately and pulled over. Cold wind hit hard when he stepped out into the storm. The smell of wet asphalt and pine filled the air. Inside the stranded SUV sat an elderly man wrapped tightly in a flannel jacket, his hands trembling slightly against the steering wheel. "Battery died on me," the man admitted with an embarrassed smile as Caleb approached. "Phone has no signal out here." Caleb nodded and grabbed jumper cables from his truck without hesitation. Throughout the entire exchange, Titan remained standing beside the passenger door, watching silently. Calm. Protective. The old shepherd never barked once, but his eyes followed every movement around Caleb with steady focus. After several attempts, the SUV engine finally sputtered back to life. The elderly man exhaled heavily in relief. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Then he glanced toward Titan standing in the falling snow. "Funny thing," the man added quietly. "That dog looked at me like he was making sure I deserved your help." Caleb let out a faint laugh under his breath. "Honestly," he said, glancing toward the shepherd, "I think he still believes it is his job to protect people." Titan slowly walked back toward the truck through the snow, head lowered against the wind. For a brief moment, Caleb simply stood there watching him beneath the storm clouds. Because somewhere along the way, the old police dog no longer looked abandoned. He looked purposeful again. And deep down, Caleb realized something else too. So did he. That night the storm returned harder than before. Wind rattled the cabin windows with deep hollow groans while snow swept sideways across the frozen lake like white smoke beneath the moonlight. Caleb sat near the fire wearing a thick gray sweater, one boot resting against the stove while Titan slept nearby on the rug. The old shepherd looked peaceful in the glow of the flames, chest rising slowly, paws twitching faintly in dreams Caleb could only imagine. For the first time in months, maybe years, the cabin felt warm instead of merely heated. Around 9 o'clock the lights flickered once. Then again. A few seconds later, the entire cabin dropped into darkness. The only sound left was the howl of wind outside and the faint crackle of dying embers inside the stove. Caleb sighed quietly and reached for the flashlight beside the couch. "Power is out again," he muttered. Titan was already awake. The dog stood immediately, ears raised toward the windows, posture alert but controlled. Caleb lit 2 old lanterns from the kitchen shelf, bathing the cabin in soft golden light that danced across the walls and ceiling beams. Shadows moved slowly through the room like old memories. Outside, the storm deepened. Snow hammered the roof, while distant thunder rolled somewhere high in the mountains. Caleb tossed another log into the stove and settled back into his chair. Titan remained standing near the front window, watching the darkness beyond the glass. Then suddenly the old shepherd growled. Low, deep, different than before. Caleb froze instantly. Every muscle tightened from instinct. Titan stepped closer to the door, ears locked forward now. Another sound drifted through the storm outside. Faint at first, then clearer. Footsteps crunching through snow near the porch. Caleb slowly stood from his chair, pulse quickening beneath the silence. Nobody came this far out during storms. Not this late. Titan positioned himself directly between Caleb and the front door without being told. The old police instincts returned instantly beneath the shepherd's calm exterior. Another noise followed, metal shifting softly outside near the truck. Caleb moved toward the side window and carefully pulled back the curtain. Through blowing snow, he spotted 2 figures near the pickup parked beside the cabin. Young men, hooded jackets, faces hidden beneath the storm. One of them tugged at the truck door while the other kept glancing toward the house. Caleb's jaw tightened. Probably drifters from the highway looking for gas, tools, anything easy to grab before the storm worsened. He reached for his coat calmly. "Stay here," he whispered to Titan. But the shepherd did not move. If anything, his stance lowered protectively. Another loud tug came from outside, followed by muffled voices carried on the wind. Caleb opened the front door halfway and stepped onto the porch beneath swirling snow. "Evening," he called firmly. Both figures froze immediately beside the truck. "Road is closed 5 miles south," Caleb continued. "Sheriff Patrol usually circles through here after storms." The 2 men exchanged a quick glance. Neither spoke. Titan appeared silently beside Caleb then, broad shoulders visible beneath the lantern glow pouring from the cabin doorway. Snow collected across the old shepherd's sable fur, while his amber eyes remained fixed steadily on the strangers below the porch. He never barked, never lunged. He simply stood there like living warning carved from shadow and winter. The taller man took a slow step backward. "We thought the place was empty," he muttered. Caleb nodded once. "It is not." Wind howled through the pine trees behind them. For several tense seconds nobody moved at all. Then the men turned and disappeared back into the storm without another word, boots crunching quickly through deep snow toward the road below. Caleb remained on the porch until their taillights finally vanished through the trees. Beside him, Titan stayed perfectly still, watching the darkness long after the danger passed. Caleb looked down at the old shepherd quietly. "You knew before I did," he murmured. Titan glanced up at him briefly, snow dusting the gray fur around his muzzle. Then slowly, almost gently, the old police dog leaned his shoulder against Caleb's leg beneath the falling snow. And standing there in the cold mountain night, Caleb realized something that settled deep into his chest like truth. Titan had not stopped protecting people after all. The world had simply stopped believing he still could. After the storm passed, Pine Hollow woke beneath clear skies and the first real hint of spring. Snow still covered the hills in patches, but sunlight lingered longer now across the frozen lake, turning the ice pale gold each evening before dusk. Water dripped steadily from cabin roofs throughout town, and the sharp smell of thawing earth slowly replaced the endless cold scent of winter. Something else had changed too. People had started talking about the old German shepherd at Caleb Hayes' cabin. The story traveled quietly at first through the diner, the gas station, and the hardware store near the highway. Folks spoke about the retired police dog who stood between strangers and trouble without ever showing aggression. The dog who still watched over people like protecting others was stitched into his bones. Caleb did not encourage the attention, but for once he did not hide from it either. On Saturday mornings, he began driving into town with Titan beside him in the truck. Sometimes they sat outside the diner, while Caleb drank coffee beneath the weak spring sunlight. Titan usually rested at his boots, calm and observant, while locals stopped to admire him from a respectful distance. Children especially seemed drawn to the old shepherd despite his scars and serious expression. One little girl in a yellow winter coat approached carefully one afternoon, holding half a strip of bacon wrapped in a napkin. "Can he have this?" she asked softly. Caleb glanced toward Titan. The old shepherd looked back at him patiently, waiting. "Only if you tell him he is a good boy first," Caleb said. The little girl smiled nervously and crouched beside Titan. "You are a good boy," she whispered. Titan accepted the bacon gently from her mitten-covered hand without ever taking his eyes off her face. The child giggled instantly. It was a small sound. Bright. Innocent. But Caleb noticed something remarkable then. Titan's tail moved slowly against the pavement. Not guarded this time. Not cautious. Genuine. Warm. Caleb looked away quickly, swallowing hard against an emotion he could not fully explain. Because somewhere over these past weeks, the old police dog had begun returning to life piece by piece. And somehow, so had he. The whiskey bottles slowly disappeared from the cabin after that. Caleb stopped buying them altogether by the end of March. Instead, he spent evenings repairing broken fence posts around the property or sanding old wood along the porch while Titan lay nearby beneath the setting sun. Sometimes Caleb caught himself talking out loud to the dog without realizing it. About fishing trips with his father. About old Marine buddies he still missed. About the silence that used to haunt the cabin before Titan arrived. The strange thing was that speaking no longer felt pointless now. Titan always listened like every word mattered. One afternoon near the end of March, Caleb received a call from the county shelter. The director sounded hesitant at first. "We have another retired K-9 coming in next week," she explained. "Older Labrador. Former search and rescue. Nobody has shown interest yet." Caleb leaned back against the porch railing while Titan rested beside him beneath the afternoon sun. Across the lake, geese drifted over melting ice beneath a sky finally turning blue again. "How old?" Caleb asked quietly. 10, the woman answered. "Sweet dog. Just scared." Caleb stared down at Titan for a long moment. The old shepherd lifted his head slightly, ears twitching beneath the breeze. "I can help for a while," Caleb said finally. The woman sounded relieved enough to nearly cry. After the call ended, Caleb sat silently on the porch steps while wind moved softly through the pine trees surrounding the lake. Titan crossed the porch and lowered himself beside him with a tired grunt, pressing warm fur lightly against Caleb's shoulder. The sun settled lower beyond the mountains, bathing the cabin in deep amber light. Caleb rested one hand against the old shepherd's neck and smiled faintly into the quiet evening air. "You know what you did to me, huh?" he murmured softly. Titan looked out toward the water without moving. Calm. Steady. Home. And for the first time in longer than Caleb could remember, tomorrow no longer felt like something to survive. It felt like something worth reaching for. Summer arrived quietly in Pine Hollow. The last sheets of ice disappeared from the lake by early May, leaving the water clear and dark beneath endless blue skies. Wild grass returned along the shoreline. Pine trees swayed gently beneath warm mountain winds carrying the scent of cedar, earth, and distant rain. The cabin looked different now, too. Caleb had repaired the porch rails, painted the old mailbox beside the road, and planted small yellow flowers near the front steps where snow once buried everything in silence. Life had returned there one careful piece at a time. Most mornings began the same way now. Coffee brewing before sunrise. The old radio humming softly in the kitchen. Titan stretched beside the stove before following Caleb outside to watch dawn spill across the lake in ribbons of gold. The shepherd moved slower these days. His muzzle had gone almost completely silver, and sometimes stiffness lingered in his back legs after long naps beneath the porch swing. But his eyes had changed most of all. The guarded sadness that once haunted them had softened into something peaceful, something safe. One warm evening near the end of June, Caleb loaded 2 folding chairs into the truck along with a small tackle box and a cooler filled with sandwiches. Titan climbed carefully into the passenger seat beside him without needing help. They drove north along the lakeside road while sunset burned orange through the mountains beyond the trees. About 30 minutes later, Caleb pulled onto a narrow dirt path leading toward an old fishing spot hidden deep in the forest. Hardly anyone came there anymore. The dock had partially collapsed years ago, and tall grass now covered most of the shoreline. But the place still mattered to Caleb. It was where his father used to bring him when life became too heavy for words. The evening air smelled of warm pine and lake water as Caleb carried the chairs down toward the shore. Titan followed slowly beside him, paws crunching softly through gravel and fallen needles. Crickets hummed in the distance while the fading sunlight shimmered across the calm water like melted copper. Caleb stopped near a weathered wooden bench overlooking the lake. Titan approached it immediately, nose twitching faintly against the wood. A small brass plaque had been mounted there earlier that week. Caleb reached down and brushed dust from its surface with his thumb. For the ones nobody wanted. Titan lowered himself carefully beside the bench with a long, tired breath, then rested against Caleb's boots as though he already understood the meaning behind the words. Caleb sat quietly beside him while dusk settled over the mountains in slow, peaceful silence. For a while neither of them moved at all. The world simply breathed around them. Water touching shore, wine through pine branches, the distant cry of geese crossing the darkening sky. Caleb eventually rested one hand against Titan's neck, fingers disappearing into thick sable fur still warm from the summer sun. "Funny thing is," he murmured softly, staring out across the lake, "I thought I brought you home because you needed saving." Titan lifted his head slightly at the sound of his voice. Caleb smiled faintly, eyes glistening beneath the fading light. "Turns out," he whispered, "I was the one getting rescued." The old shepherd leaned gently against his leg beneath the quiet evening sky. No commands, no fear, no ghosts left to outrun. Just an aging police dog and a lonely man who somehow found their way back to life through each other. Darkness slowly gathered across the lake while the first stars appeared overhead. Caleb sat there long after sunset beside the dog nobody wanted, listening to the peaceful rhythm of Titan's breathing beneath the summer night. And somewhere deep within the stillness of those mountains, two wounded souls finally understood something Grace had been trying to teach them all along. Sometimes the smallest acts of mercy do not just save a life. Sometimes they give one back.